This is a blockchain. Don't worry about it before someone says again, yes. And there are so many already. I personally believe that we have finally found my blockchain, which really adds value and not just some network or what's around it, because I can tell you that much, that's not here at all. This is really about added value. You know me, I'm not the kind of person who's deeply immersed in blockchain technology. And so I thought, hey, why don't we just invite the team? Because they can definitely say what the advantages are, because very importantly, we make the entrance for drawers. There will be several videos in the future. I've already said with the content density, there needs to be more, but we're really starting now with the clear advantages. What will this blockchain really bring long-term added value? And now we're going to start together on our channel, where you can find exciting new projects, news about the current market situation, and the fact-based analysis of scams. So if you're interested in the topics, feel free to leave us a subscription. If you're interested in the topic of play to earn, and you should really say, hey, I'm looking for one that also has cool gameplay, cool graphics, and somehow works in the long run. If you can, then MetaHost might be something for you. If you're interested, click and check it out. Now, let's check out the blockchain. At this point, Helmut, many thanks for taking the time to look at the blockchain with me. And I'm going to take a look at it a bit now, make it more innovative and interactive. And we met at Web3 Berlin. You had a cool banner with you with all the added values on it. And I'll tell you now, I'm also, as you may not know, not really the deep tech type. I'm more of an analyst. So I'm going to give you a few terms now. And you can explain what the blockchain is about and what the added value behind it is. But before we do that, it would be cool if you could briefly introduce yourself to our community so they know who they're dealing with.
Yes, great. Thanks for the invitation, Daniel. A few words about me. I have been since 2013 active in the blockchain as an investor, and then it quickly became more, because then you do find yourself one who has read into a project and also got involved and was once a project member, and yes, then had a relatively long career, which you can't explain now, maybe another time. So we have to, and you could say since the end of 2017, I'm self-employed and can live off my blockchain things. Mainly, one must say, are actual investments in various projects. I've never lived from the project we're going to talk about now. It was always kind of my hobby and really the way I think. Here, I can also make a valuable contribution to the blockchain-based future.
Yes. So that's also what I found quite interesting, because where you told me, I'll just say, you will be able to confirm it. It feels like 5,000 new layer 1 blockchains are coming to the market every day. They all somehow say we are faster and cheaper than Ethereum. That's usually always the core message, where I think, yes, okay, we can let it stand like that. Somehow they all want to have it. However, there is clearly additional value for you guys, and that's where we're going to start. The first thing that caught my eye, and you just explain a bit about the background, dynamic block times. What is to be understood by this, or perhaps easier to explain what has been so far and what's different now?
Okay, sure. First off, I want to say right away, we did briefly discuss this. So it is that the core of all this is actually a honey badger cooperative consensus engine, which could already fill an interview or an entire series of interviews alone, right? That means I will now, in this high threshold or low threshold interview right now, Not going into the deep details, but it will happen more often, just like with your question, the dynamic block times. Why is this possible now and wasn't possible before? Precisely because of this cooperative consensus. How should we imagine this? Simply explained, not hardcore. Currently, it is such that blockchains have a desired time window in which they generate blocks. No, it's not immediately clear who will make the next block. There are usually competitions like with Bitcoin, who solves the puzzle first.
Or discipline.
Serial solution mechanics modified with frequency I have, then I find the solution easier. But no matter how you look at it, there's always some kind of difficulty involved. It adjusts itself so that the time periods until the next block are found.
Are you leaving now?
It is desired by the respective industry. That is, they have time for 10 minutes of Bitcoin, 15 seconds of Ethereum, and so on. If you don't have any competition now, if you have a huge consensus, then you can save all that.
Wow.
This means one can really build blocks as per needs. In our case, that means if there are transactions, if there are those who want to contribute to the block, then we create a block. And when we finish the block and there are still transactions that want to get into the block, we just wait exactly 1 second, and then we do the next block. The second after the block is completed, we start the next block, and we do this until there are no more transactions buzzing around waiting for it. Now one might wonder why 1 second, and beware. The reason for this is that we live on a planet which is not that small. Even the speed of light and corresponding signals have a certain time delay.
See you next time.
It hardly makes sense if we do not take this 1 second wait. We create more problems than we benefit, right? And furthermore, when the blockchain is used more in quotation marks, then a few transactions accumulate every second so that you don't make a block for one transaction.
Yes, but that means, correct me if you like, because as I said, I'm not that deep into the topic right now. If there were no transactions now that needed to be processed in any way, he would not start either happen, because if I know this right from other blockchains, they just keep working. So of course it happens now at Ethereum and Co. that there would be nothing there. But theoretically, they would continue without anything being wrong.
When the Ethereum 50-second interval is worn out, then someone will find the block and he made it, and it has as many transactions as he found. Under certain circumstances, there might not be any. In our case, it's like this. Actually, we shouldn't have to do the block, but we concluded that it might look unhealthy for some people. So if that happens now, nothing happens for over 10 minutes, from broccolis, brewing, clouds, and so on. For this reason, and because it's also minimal superiority, we do a so-called hard speed block after 10 minutes. But it's not technically necessary. It's more of a comfort
See you next time.
feature.
Bye. Ciao.
You know, he's still alive, right?
Yes. Yes, it makes sense to the crypto space. So I am fully with you on that, because people look at it and ask, is the number there? Are the numbers there? Yes, absolutely makes sense. I'm going to throw the next term right away, where I'm very curious. Censorship resistance. Let's tackle it.
Very interesting topic. I think we can fiddle with that. Benefits listed by traditional blockchains, they can find the theories just as well. They will also be location sensor shield resistant. You have to consider how true is that, right?
See you next time.
When someone is the block finder and builds a block, then he's It's up to the node software what can happen inside. This ensures that the Hamre nodes, which have the same software, can validate it. Thanks for coming along, Brian. That's it. Now, of course, this button software can't know which transactions are currently buzzing around the network and prescribe that from its rules. That means the transaction that the block finder adds to his block. They're not guaranteed in that respect. There's just an incentive. If I take in more transactions, then I probably earn more transaction fees. Yes. And then can we assume that he probably hops as many transactions as possible, right? This is not always the case. There are blockchains with peanut flies. Perhaps the transaction fees were less relevant than quickly delivering a block that is on purpose. The transaction took in very little. Yes. And together with profit and validators. Okay, that's it for today. Possibilities that sequences exist when it's uncontrollable. However, through this cooperative consensus, it is so that not one alone makes the block, but many nodes contribute. You have to imagine you are now a node who sees, okay, there is a transaction and it starts to tell the network with the other validators, I would like to build a bounty token. I have seen a transaction. That's called the contribution. Now others are also sending such contributions. And when the critical mass for special encryption is reached, we might also leave that for the technical interview, the threshold encryption. Basically, it means that when the critical mass is reached, you can see what's inside. Then you turn it on and then you see the content. And when they see the content, all the transactions that the nodes have contributed, from that point on, no one can change anything. This ensures for us that censorship resistance is present, because when you give a transaction to the network, then they know, presumably all 25 nodes, so you are very badly connected and so on, and then one has seen before and he, or just a third or so, but now none of them have a small transaction contributed, and everyone is so mean and they do not like you. It's very unlikely, at least 25 times less likely than if it's just one node. Actually, much more. I'm a bad statistician, but then none at all. It's probably a lot more than 25 times less likely. So we say that there is indeed a sensory resistance present with us. One can touch on the topic. It's a legitimate question. Who made the block? If you look us up on the Explorer, you'll see the address is null. So no one made the block, but a set of validators determined for a temporary point in time together. So there's no one making the block. This may not be so legally important right now, but in the future, it could be, yes. So that means they made it together and you don't know which node has forbidden which transaction.
Super exciting. So that's obviously another point. You want it as a distinguishing feature, which is not so relevant for the future as you nicely put it. It can certainly be more tragic, definitely. I'm moving on to the next term where I must say, I'm also curious to hear what you can report. So I'm listening eagerly. I'm learning a lot. Instant transaction finality. What does that mean? Yes.
Speak as simply as possible today, and the simplest explanation is that contents of 100%, 67% are only there once.
Yes.
This means that if only the active data set is in our network, that a lot of candidates are chosen, but for this 12-hour period, we are only allowed. These 25 nodes collectively make blocks, and they need the 67% majority. There are reasons for this. Firstly, security reasons, and secondly, speed reasons. So when you say you are waiting for 100%, then you're holding yourself back. Plus you make yourself vulnerable. You're saying 67%. Then you are faster because the slowness doesn't need to wait. And secondly, if a node has a problem and it reboots, then it's a bit tricky. That's no problem.
So it's also a sign of speed when you summarize it, where you can just squeeze out more speed.
Exactly. But as I said, this 67% majority can only exist once within 100%. This means that no competing other block could arise. It only makes these validator set blocks. And accordingly, you do not need, as it is with other blockchains, waiting for the block that is probably in the longest rail. That is what it means to wait on other chains. 2, 4, 10. You will hear different values on how many confirmations a transaction or the block with the transaction should have. So we can lull oneself statistically in a security. There would have to be incredible opinions or something flowing in so that another chain would then have more weight. And then the truth would be rewritten and it was not that, but something else. But we don't have that at all because there is no return on the blockchain. Once something is written, it's in. There are no micro forks that reorganize themselves with a reorg. And the longest and most significant chain we see, there is just one. Yes, I am meeting this cooperation group today, and an instant finality. If you now combine this with what we discussed earlier with the dynamic block time, it would mean that if we don't have any transaction in the network right now, we wait. If we all have something to do, now a transaction is coming in and we start building the block right away when we wait to be able to work. We don't have to wait a second because the last block is already older than a second. This means we immediately start including the transaction in the block. And when the block is done, it's probably going to take less than 2 seconds, even if the nodes are scattered around the world. When the block is complete, your transaction is final. We call that instant finality because once it's in a block, it's done. The train has run over it, it's been there, and it will never change.
Next term, right after random numbers.
Also an interesting topic that this mainly applies to animal-like chains, where one says, okay, there you can also use smart contracts and various code-free programmed things on it. This can also be game logics, but it doesn't have to be just a game. There are other things where the records, where it's important that they are really random. And so it is with us. Random numbers are very important. For example, who are the next validators to come up, etc. This means, in truth, we need a reliable way to generate random numbers. To operate our network consensus, at least a fair election of validators and so on. But now it is so that this is the pleasant side effect, that we can also make this available to all smart contracts via the EVM. This means we have the possibility to generate random numbers anyway. Now we do this with every block. And we make this available to every smart contract developer so they can use it in their contracts. Are there solutions on Ethereum and stuff for achieving this with random numbers that are less vulnerable? Or you either have a complex from a foreign pioneer, for example, such a term, or you even use services that are outside of Northern Germany. For example, can there be something like Chainlink and so on? Thank you so much and goodbye. Obtain things? Yes, in our case, it's not necessary because we already have it in our stomach and anyone who develops on us can use it. Again, for the technical linen, simply describe, why isn't there a random number in the household quota? Well, it actually exists, yes, but not a random number that comes 100%. namely the one who finds the block. He sees the random number because it's part of the block. And if he doesn't like it, he can say, I'm not making the block. And we don't have this option because there's no block finder. Instead, we're back to the egg-laying wool milk pig. We have a cooperative consensus, 25 nodes do it together, and they don't even know what will come out until they reach the critical number, reveal the content, and there's no going back. So this random number cannot come.
And thus, this choice is not given, which absolutely makes sense aside from that. Exactly, yes. And prevention of running.
This is very interesting. If someone might have had contact with our white paper before, they won't find it.
The link is below, by the way. Very important. Read the white paper, guys. That's what they're for. Thanks. I say that in every video anyway.
Thank you for the hint. The white paper was already listed in 2021. As we were a little slower in finishing, I think there is even help. And the idea isn't even basically explained quickly. It's based on the same thing as the random number. And that's just one use case for it that we hadn't thought of before. In principle, front running is understood when the order in which transactions within a block can be abused. There are actually ways to predict the order in which transactions are processed. And if you write context like so, the context, it gets processed in the block, right? And if you write context in such a way that it can analyze it correctly, then he can have either or behavior, meaning he behaves differently depending on the respective transaction before or after another one. Especially in the DeFi area, this led to very unwanted. This can lead to side effects. For example, someone wants to do large shopping. The other one has a transaction that is processed earlier. Then I could say, well, my transaction is likely to be done earlier and perhaps before in selling too. And now he is buying at a higher price. And I have earned money from nothing within milliseconds. And such a thing doesn't work for us because we simply said then we just use our random number for such things. This means we are installing the random number in the final sorting of transactions in which order they are processed. Since nobody knows the random number in advance when it's processed, then unpredictable.
And thus also another protection that someone who is quite clever proceeds in some way. So one could form some sort of scam if one could start it there against alcohol consumption. Or manipulation, fraud would perhaps be too far-fetched, but at least a bit of manipulation that is exploited.
These things, as simple as they are now, are made more difficult by it. The creativity of humans is naturally great and it might result from the spirit of invention, but it will never be as easy as it was. We are definitely making it harder.
Well, you can find a loophole anywhere if you want to, but at least, as you say, the sword definitely. Now, I want to touch on 2 points where you can tell me right away. Is there anything else to say or is it so far done? Because I have to say, I always find it good in terms of speed. For example, I know it's 20 times faster than Ethereum, although that's probably at the current moment. So that also means the more it's used. For instance, it automatically slows down. And what that means is that the transaction costs are somewhere in the cent range. Now, specifically to you, would you say there is something special to add? Because it's really, one must say, such a, yes, almost like a hit in plain German, where everyone turns out and says, this is what my blockchain can say yes, and that one too, and that one too, and that one too. We can already see a lot more being offered here. But is there anything more to say about this point, or is it, let's say, an additional benefit that makes complete sense in my... So take a look at Ethereum is like that in these current times. Where the transactions are quite limited in the bear market, it is still relatively expensive. So I'm curious to see what will happen with Ethereum and Bull Run again. It's as expected. That's why it makes absolute sense that it's cheaper. But is there anything else to add, or would you say that sums it up?
Well, firstly, one just has to say that speed, when one looks at our blockchain and the cooperative consensus, is actually in between, because everything has its price, yes, and decentralization, that not one alone determines what happens in the block separators, but 25, which are also interconnected. Thousands of messages have to be exchanged for a block. This is an effort, and it also has its price, and this price affects the performance. This means if one compares to the current Ethereum, and we are talking about an Ethereum without sharding and so on, just 20 times faster, that's just the price we have to pay. Otherwise, it usually rings much faster. The Army Badger consensus is based on a scientific research paper from 2016, and there 50,000 transactions per second were also assumed, and so on. Of course, these are laboratory conditions where they stand next to each other, are supercomputers, and so on. Probably even more is going on with us, and we have set the number very conservatively low because it's not really our core competency now. And it's not entirely accurate to say that as transactions increase, the transactions per second decrease. In truth, it's the other way around. If only 10 transactions per second come in, you can never process more than 10 transactions per second. And the fact is, we alone deliver the simple performance of Ethereum. Most would be a very pleasant thing, because it means that the option can be used very intensively. Therefore, one thing that might be of interest in this context is that transactions become more expensive because there are such dynamic gas costs. The cost increase as the load increases. With this, it's not just that block times are faster, the block gas limits are also higher. That means we can not only make many more blocks, we can also make much larger blocks. That's why it never really goes like that with us. We impose a limitation on the available block gas. So it makes no sense for us to have such dynamic block gas costs, but we have static block gas costs. And since they are then tied to the bite of our pistons, which act as a gas here, it indeed requires mechanisms on how to respond to rising prices. And this is not included in the mainnet release yet because it requires a DAO that is a decentralized, where blockchain parameters can be changed and will be added in the first major update, also in the 4.1 update. And then it is also possible that the gas prices can be changed to keep transactions cheap even with rising coin prices.
I've got one last point, and then there's a special question. So it's still exciting. Let's look a little into the decentralization, because that's actually the hobby horse of the crypto space, where unfortunately, often it's just set as a buzzword, but the decentralization is often quite relative. It disappears when you look behind it. What can you say about the term decentralized governance?
Yes, first of all, one must say that this is also something like Bitcoin, which does not necessarily have a duration or something like that, as a decentralized governance. Actually, the original form of it, just as Satoshi imagined it in his white paper, because in the end, it's solely dependent on which software your node is running. Is there a voting app? That means if anyone, first of all, there's no team, no developer team, that's now there. Some company represents and says, this is the latest software. But anyone could write the next Bitcoin software and present it and say, you can now install this update, and then this and that changes. And the node operators, they cast their votes by installing this software or not. And if they agree with us, then there are simply two Bitcoins. We have seen this several times. Bitcoin Cash, Bitcoin Satoshi Vision, and so on and so forth. And probably hundreds and thousands that no one has ever heard because no one cares.
These are sometimes completely unnecessary, just like meme coins if you want to take it seriously.
Yes, broadly speaking.
I agree with you.
But if one now says, okay, this could also go a little more into detail, one could also, on the blockchain, especially when you have a chain that is smart contract capable, it makes sense to have such
Thank you very much.
It's nothing but a decision-making process that is also represented on the blockchain. And this will be one of the core content areas that we will incorporate into our 4.0 updates. Currently, it's also the case that our blockchain, there are no companies or the like in the background, is full of enthusiasts.
That's it for today.
Driven by those who make proposals in programming and the community. We had, I believe, a big voting in 2018. Let the community vote. Shall we have our blockchain, which has been there since 2013? It just needs to be there. But the new blockchain based on new technology, it's going to be launched at the end of the year and is now available in open alpha. And we let them vote there because it is a big change. We said, okay, we would like freeze the further development of the current blockchain. It continues to run, but we see a great future, not in this code base. And we suspect it will be a multi-year marathon until we have the new crop shields work. And the community supports us with intermediate relations. So it has helped positively by about 98% or so voted in the poll. And accordingly, we felt legitimized to go this way. And since then, since 2018, we've been, what in the thinking gone underground? Because they said, okay, there's not much to talk about. Now it's development time. And now in England, it was the first time that I presented it because there's light at the end of the tunnel. The Obermal is already running. The wave farmers can already open the wave and hop onto the chain, and you can already see roughly how it works. And the open beta will probably be in, it should be ready in about 2 months. And if everything goes well, I won't be set by the end of the year.
Yes, it makes sense to read first and then go out. So there are enough examples who do it the other way around and then nothing happens anymore. So I personally prefer the work, but and here I come to the really final question, which is a bit broad at the moment because we've talked about so many advantages, everything that's really cool, etc. But now, seriously, what's up then for disadvantages? Because as you've just mentioned, where there's an advantage, there could also be a disadvantage in speed, for example. Can you elaborate on that a bit?
Yes, of course. One of the disadvantages that this decided cooperative consensus is, of course, also seen in this decentralized area, because as I've already described, there are 25 nodes that make up the blocks. Yes, and the research paper doesn't prescribe anything major, no, how they are determined, right? They could also always be the same statically. And that would indeed be concerning because it means there are 25 super nodes there. And those forever and ever, the history of this blockchain, keep writing. EOS, I think, has done it in that direction with 21 or so, yes. And then there would be a big court case about who is one of these holy nodes and so on. This is not how we imagine the world to be decentralized. And for this reason, we decided quite early on that we would handle things around this consensus, build a mechanism that ensures that they are not always the same nodes, in that the ferry is rotated. This means we have a delegated proof of stake here to build the consensus all around. which has
Should I have
nothing
secured
to
that?
do with the blockchain as in other chains,
See you
but
next time. Bye.
purely serves the purpose
By
that these nodes are not always the same and that we make a transition every 12 hours. A new active validator set will be determined, so to speak. This also involves our random mechanics to determine who the next nodes are, but there are also other things involved, and have a look at it, how nodes have behaved in the past, whether they are reliable, stable, and so on. That also plays a part and increases the chances of it getting into the next set. And also how much friend stuff is involved. We are more of the validator candidates because we are not part of the active set. You can only create the candidates. Whoever created it has to put a minimum stake on it. In our case, that's 10,000 DMT. And the validator candidate can only have staked the maximum number of coins, because otherwise there would be these 25 giant validators and again, no competition. In our case, we've defined it with a maximum of 50,000 that can be staked on the validator. And that's the interesting thing, the property, the 10,000, that has to be provided by the one who creates the validator. But the other coins, they can also come from other network divisions, and they just have the idea and they say, okay, I don't need you. Now I'm thinking of you as a validator candidate. If the part is from the active set and at the end of the 12-hour epoch, because I like to add the words and my art are with him, then I also get a part of it. It's like a mechanic. As the network participants can also express trust. We have said those who have more, the more coins are staked, the more likely it is to get into the validator set. That means a sharp lad, I would say, and a clever girl as well. And also all no relative shoes. I would say, let's see what kind of stats he has, looking at how stable the node was and so on, watching a bit of the historical data, and then I go for the one that I like the best. That means the human is included to also give an additional trust rating so that the network is more secure and the nodes that process the most stable. And then it throws, of course, that was a win thanks to.
Yes, understood.
But this whole construct of carbon economics design and so on, that is actually one of the main contributions, drinks that I've delivered for the whole. It's also quite extensive and complex, and would probably finally, as a more detailed description of the Honey Badger consensus, tidied up in the context of a first interview blow up.
Well then, I just have a different suggestion at this point. Let's just make a separate video of it about that. Well, I would also be the one who is not completely overwhelmed with all the information. So I think that's quite smart. So if you're available, we can build on that and go into more detail, because I'm sure we surely have in the community to one or another tag which says, oh, I would like to delve a bit into the depth. We've already had that on the channel, and like I said, says that's a completely different topic, but honestly, that's what blockchain is all about. It seems to me today that many just come into crypto as investors because they've heard it somewhere. In Today Millionaire Tomorrow, that's the basic thing. But so many don't even look at what's actually behind it, what potential it has, be it the projects or even the chains behind it. And it's incredibly important to put out such content. This is a bit more than just getting rich quickly, because getting rich quickly is, in my opinion anyway, not more possible in the form that it might have been at the beginning. Yeah, well, Pepe.
There's still something going on.
Yes.
As a former cocktail investor in 2013, I had to saying, there we have it in the speech. We are too late.
Nothing else possible.
Late. Bitcoin is at $1,000. And a few months ago, you could buy it for $1. I'm sorry, the show is over. That's it, until next time. But and because it was like that back then, and it is like that now, and it wasn't true back then.
Otherwise, it may not be entirely clear yet. That's always the big question. That's what I find so interesting about it, because everyone says it's just this typical webinar cliche. Would you have had the chance to invest in Bitcoin back then probably everyone would have sold at $200 who had bought in at a few cents. So it's always like this. We would have held it at 70K.
Buying the right thing and not selling the right thing, those are two very essential things.
Yes, definitely. So at this point, a real thank you to you. Many thanks for letting us go over all the advantages. That was a lot of content. Definitely. I also got to learn a lot again. And as I said, let's build on this directly and go into detail again about what it was.
Yes, maybe you're collecting questions too.
Exactly. When we go into this coin economy setup thing, you also find a point, a few minutes, where we ask the answers. I can throw it into the room, for example, without explaining it. For us, for example, we fix a maximum amount of coins, and yet the validators always came backwards. How can that be? Good question, right? Absolutely. For example, we're already including it. But for the other questions, feel free to write in the comments or in our Telegram group. The link is in the description. If there are still questions about it, so we do have a short line to you. But as mentioned, send in all the questions you have where you say understanding-wise, how should that work? And then we can include that and answer it in detail. So that is a very, very good idea. Perfect. Then I say thank you very much at this point for taking the time. I'm already looking forward to the next conversation. I think it's exciting, and I'm looking forward to what comes from the community. Thanks to you. And of course, very importantly, the last words belong to you. What would you like to share with our community?
Firstly, I want to thank you for the invitation. It was quite nice chatting with you. I just want to tell the community, stay curious, listen to what's coming up next, and think carefully about what you are doing. Better yet, listen to a few more videos before you make any decisions. In principle, nothing sold at ours, but our coins are already available for trade on exchanges.
Yes.
But each person must make decisions for themselves. The coins that are buzzing around on the exchange are not some premium coins, but coins from network participants. I am not allowed to promote anything majorly. My main concern is that we find projects that utilize our options. Maybe there is also one or another in your circles where the video is then distributed, who then say, yes, we've always wanted this real future.
Until next time, ciao.
Really final blocks immediately, which are worked off dynamically. Maybe there are features that interest and convince one or the other. This could become the home of such a project.
I firmly assume this, but very, very true words. People, as we always say, no hype, do your own research, think for yourselves. So get involved with the topic no matter what you do. Also now outside of the base. And therefore, as I said, many thanks to you. We're curious what else is coming and what information we'll get then. Subtitles from the Amar.org community. Bye. Until next time.